Day. I heard the distinctive sound of an incoming message on my phone as the day approached noon. Up until this point, I had been having a pretty normal Monday. I own and operate a mid-sized consulting firm that I built from the ground up almost 20 years ago and which now has approximately 50 employees, with plans to expand in the near future. I sat at my desk as usual, sorting out my morning paperwork. My personal phone, that's unusual. Only a select few people have this number. My wife, my 2 children, and a few very close friends. They know they shouldn't use it unless it's an emergency, so I looked at the message carefully and read it with interest. Dan, I sent you a letter that you need to see. In private. Sorry. Alone. Sorry. These words gave me a slight chill. It was confusing and slightly unsettling, and definitely not like Jason. I knew I had to see this letter, and now. I pressed the button on my phone to call Barbara, my personal assistant, and told her to put all calls and visits on hold for a while. I opened the email in my personal mail and saw a video attached, which I opened and was shocked by what I saw. On screen was one of my closest friends looking devastated. Hi, my name is Jason Andrews. Initially, everyone who sees this video will know me, but this may not be the case for those who watch it later. What I am about to say in this video will cause a lot of pain and suffering to innocent people, and I'm really sorry, but I'm also in so much pain that it's the only thing I can think about. At this point, I watched as Jason burst into tears before reaching for the mouse in front of him. I was confused. He looked like death just out of bed, and his words were spoken with great sadness and some incomprehensibility. What the hell is going on? What happened since Saturday when I played golf with him? Of course, he seemed a little distracted and out of his element, but nothing like that. The video immediately resumed, and it was obvious that some time had passed as Jason had stopped crying, but still looked very upset. Sorry about that, he smiled sadly and fell silent, clearly gathering his thoughts. I have a little story to tell. About 2 months ago, I discovered that my wife, Sarah Andrews, was cheating on me with her boss, Claire Somerville. Yes, it turns out, my wife of the last 14 years and mother of my 2, sent from heaven of children a cheating bitch who loves girls, and I have no idea how long they've been sleeping with each other. In that moment, I saw the pain and devastation just by saying those words that he felt as he burst into tears again before a short slideshow was shown on the screen with images of Sarah, my friend's wife, and Claire, my friend, my married friend and manager by the staff of my company, clearly kissing and caressing each other, albeit with their clothes on. What the hell? I sat in stunned silence, watching as tears fell from my friend's eyes again and onto his shirt as the screen switched back to Jason. I wish that was all. More sobs from him as I sat and watched the complete destruction of the man I respected more than almost anyone else. I myself could hardly hold back my tears, seeing his unbearable pain. A scene appeared on the screen that will stay with me forever. There, in full view, lay Claire and had sex with Sarai. This scene only lasted a few seconds before Claire waved her hand and another person entered the room. It only took a split second for me to recognize Derek Wilson, my married CFO and legal counsel, and they were having sex together. I was surprised that, looking at these people, I didn't really appreciate how beautiful Sarah was. Sure, Claire was attractive, but Sarah, well, she was several notches above that. Strangely, my thoughts quickly returned to the morning meeting where these 3, as well as Marcel, my sales and procurement manager, and 2 other assistants were also present. I remembered the heightened level of hostility and the brevity of speech between them. I asked what was going on and was assured that it was just a personal disagreement. Perhaps not everything was so rosy in the world of cheaters. Bastards. As you can see, the person I loved more than anything in the world, sob, my best Dr. Aruji, painful sob, my love, my life, sob, shaking, painful crying, became a dirty, nasty, disgusting, cheating, threesome bitch. It ended with anger turning to rage as pain gave way to hatred for a moment. I was close to openly crying as I watched this strong, proud, and selfless man crumble before my eyes. I was so furious that it felt like I was going to explode. I wanted to walk out of my office right now and go punch both of these bitches and beat up Derek. But first I reached for my phone, why didn't I do this sooner, and tried to call Jace. His cell phone was turned off, and his home phone went straight to voicemail. There was a knock on the door. "Not now, Barbara," I said through gritted teeth. "I need a little more time alone." "Sorry, Mr. Whitaker, but the sheriffs are here, and they insist on meeting with you." "Sheriffs, what do they need?" I went to turn off the video and was shocked to see Jace just staring at me, looking so tired and destroyed. I was even more amazed when I noticed a glass of drink in his hand. Jason doesn't drink. "I'm sorry for what I had to do. I'm sorry for hurting people who don't deserve it. I hope you can understand and forgive me." The video ended and went dark. What does it mean? Damn, this worries me. I walked to the door and opened it to find 3 officers standing menacingly at Barbara's desk. Everyone had folders in their hands and serious expressions on their faces. I recognized 2 of them because I had seen them at several gatherings at Jason and Sarah's house. Jason's sister, Elizabeth, is married to one of the officers in the department, Brad, so we crossed paths a few times since Jason's house was quite large and had a lot of room for parties and stuff, unlike Beth and Brad's house. Jason is a big supporter of charities for kids with cancer, like softball and races, so all the kids love him. Jason was one of those guys who could talk to anyone on any level, and his easygoing nature and genuine decency always made people feel at ease around him. It was impossible not to love this guy. "Mr. Daniel Whitaker?" asked the leading officer. He knew who I was, so why ask? "You know who I am. We've met several times, John." "I'm sorry, Daniel. Procedure. It has been handed to you." I took the envelope that was almost handed into my hand with a look of shock and confusion on my face. But before I could think about it too long, "Can you direct us to Mrs. Somerville, Mr. Wilson, and Mrs. Andrews?" The last name was almost pronounced through clenched teeth. I heard Barbara gasp, and I looked up to see wide eyes and a very surprised expression on her face. Luckily, Barbara was a very professional and discreet assistant, so one glance from me was enough to make her shut up and quickly lower her head, pretending to work. I received another message on my phone and read it. It was another apology from Jason. I already had a rough idea of where all this was leading, and I headed for their offices, motioning for the officers to follow me. I walked past a puzzled Sarah sitting at her desk and nearly knocked the door off its hinges as I burst into Claire's office. "Claire Somerville," I almost spat. One of the officers came in and approached Claire as I walked out and walked towards Derek, who looked puzzled, followed by another officer. "Derek Wilson," I said with disdain. The urge to punch his stupid, puzzled face was almost irresistible at that moment. John was left with Sarah, who looked shocked and confused by what was happening. Naturally, other employees began to pay attention to us, as expected, but as soon as they saw the expression on my face, everyone quickly ran away. I noticed that I was breathing heavily and sweating slightly, not from fatigue, but from a level of rage I hadn't felt in a long time. A drunk sales rep grabbed my wife and exposed her breasts in a braless dress at an event a few years ago. He quickly regretted his action. Surprisingly, a smile flashed across my face as I remembered how, after we came home and suffered the stress of his actions, my wife was very grateful to her white knight for saving her honor. Very grateful. I chuckled at the memory. I noticed that Claire and Derek's doors were closed and a threatening John was now leaning over the crying Sarah. On the screen in front of her was the same video that I had already seen. When the sex scene started, Sarah howled like a wounded animal. I heard John speak in a low and hostile voice as he removed Sarah's hands from her face and directed her towards the screen. "Keep watching, bitch. Look and see what you did to one of the best people I know. He loved you with everything he had and more. Look at him. You see his agony." He fell silent as Sarah babbled apologies and said that it wasn't what it seemed and that it didn't mean anything. She loves Jason, only Jason, forever Jason. I was completely emotionless at the sight of this scene in front of me, and with a long and withering look, John coldly stated, "Sarah Andrews, it's been handed to you." Sarah howled and almost fell. John simply stood there blankly until she looked back at his menacing figure, then he added, "And this is a restraining order. You have no right to be closer than 100 meters from your home, your husband, or your children. You have no right to contact them and can only contact them through your lawyers. Full details are contained in the orders I am now transmitting to you. Do you understand these orders, Mrs. Andrews?" Sarah was almost hysterical, and John had to repeat the question several times before he got an answer. While all this was happening, I heard random screams, moans, and sobs from the two offices behind me. I could imagine what was happening there. I later learned that the two officers who were with Claire and Derek also forced them to watch the video and served them with trespass and breach of contract papers. They also detailed their marital status and how the same videos were sent to their respective partners. John came up to me and spoke quietly, asking only that the three men be suspended without pay until any legal issues were resolved, so that the couple would get a better financial position in court than they would have had they not had a job. Why allow them to further harm those they betrayed? I chuckled. "Sir, would you like us to help escort these employees off the premises pending your internal investigation?" John grinned at me. We were joined by two other officers and two very upset and confused senior managers. I looked at the three in front of me. God, I couldn't look at them as people anymore. "You three have been suspended without pay, effective immediately, for alleged violations of the company's code of conduct and ethics. You have 2 minutes to collect any personal items from your work area, and you will be escorted from the area by these respected officers who have volunteered to assist. You must leave your work phones, laptops, and any flash drives, as well as keys to company vehicles. If you have any company property, physical or intellectual, at your personal addresses, it must be returned immediately. Failure to do so will result in criminal charges being filed." I glared at the three of them. "I'm sure you gentlemen will be happy to ensure these requirements are met for me." The three officers nodded in agreement, accompanied by satisfied grins as the three stunned employees gathered their things. Then began the walk of shame as they were led slowly, heads down, still crying, through the main office to the elevators. I heard Sarah's faint voice, "I want to talk to Jason. I want to see my children." "You try this, and you'll spend the night in jail," John told her. Crying again, "But where should I go? Can I go home? I want to go home." "No," more crying followed when the elevator doors closed. "What the hell does this all mean?" Marcel whispered behind me. I didn't even notice he was there. I took him to my office and told him the short story. I didn't show him the video. I didn't consider it my business at that moment. We discussed the immediate issues surrounding temporary filling of recent vacancies and the short and long-term impacts that need to be prepared for. Once we had the basics down, we decided to leave it all until the morning. It was just under 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and I needed to get out of there and get my thoughts in order. Plus, I was really hungry. I went outside and took a deep breath. I took out my phone and pressed the speed dial button. "Hello, love," came a purr from the other end, making me immediately smile. After a short conversation, I walked into the city center, stopping at a florist and a cafe along the way. I needed her right now to calm my soul that now seemed tainted, and to feel warm and safe again. I entered her building and headed to her quiet, inconspicuous room, entering silently. Standing in front of me was the sexiest woman I had ever seen. She smiled and approached me so gracefully and smoothly. Her kiss, as always, took my breath away. God, I love my wife. I told her everything that happened that morning and held her in his arms while she cried. We held each other tightly, and I wondered, where is Jason and how is he? "Come on, Karen, hurry up," her brother Patrick shouted. Karen ran to her brother and caught up with him as they approached the door. It was always nice to get home from school, and the couple couldn't wait to get the snacks they knew were waiting for them in the refrigerator. When they entered the house, they didn't even notice that the door was unlocked, but they did notice the smell. "Daddy?" Karen gasped. Patrick turned around and looked to where his sister was now staring with wide eyes and an open mouth. There, on his side in the office, lay their father, disheveled. "Papa, Papa," Patrick shouted, running up to his father's motionless body. He sighed in gratitude as he heard his father's heavy breathing as he leaned over him. He checked the mouth and made sure it was clean, like he'd been taught in first aid class, and left it on its side. "Oh my God, Mom," Karen's tense and confused sigh was heard. "Oh God, what now?" Patrick thought as his eyes darted to her in complete panic. Karen looked in horror at something over his shoulder. He was almost afraid to look, but he knew he had to. Turning around with some trepidation, his eyes widened as he saw the image on the computer screen. It was a shot of their mother, and she was naked, with two other people having. Patrick felt a sick feeling in his stomach as he rushed to the screen and turned it off him, breathing heavily from his own pain. He looked at his father and saw an empty alcohol bottle nearby. He looked again at the now dark screen. This image was then etched into his memory, then back to his father. Suddenly, Karen rushed to him and hugged him tightly, sobbing into his chest, which helped distract his thoughts and bring his mind back into focus. Looking around, he picked up the phone, holding Karen tightly in his other hand. After calling an ambulance, Patrick called his Uncle Brad and told him what he had found before hanging up and sitting on the floor next to his father, Karen still clinging to him. The next 30 minutes were a whirlwind for the children as paramedics arrived and attended to their father. Their Uncle Brad arrived shortly after them and tried his best to shield them from what was happening, but from what they told him, he was too late. They had seen too much for children their age to ever see, and he knew the damage would have to be repaired in the future. He called his wife, and having calmed her down, took the children and drove by ambulance to the hospital, where Elizabeth was supposed to meet them. "Damn it, Jason," he thought. "Why did you do this to yourself? You told me you were fine. Damn it, I should have known better." Jason and Elizabeth's father left when he was 14 and she was 11. Their mother, due to alcohol and sleeping pills, left this world 4 years later. Their father cheated on her and left them all with another woman who was 10 years younger than him. For a couple of years before he left, their father had been emotionally and physically abusive to them all, especially their mother. This completely devastated them all, and at 14, Jason was forced to grow up too quickly and had to take on the parental role that was now left vacant for those who were to fill the position. Both children despised their father, and naturally this extended to anyone and everyone who cheated on their partners. After seeing how infidelity destroyed their mother, especially through alcohol abuse, Jason never drank a sip of alcohol, and taking care of my sister was more important than going out or hanging out with friends. For Elizabeth, Jason was her world. He was her brother, her best friend, her father, and sadly, her mother, all rolled into one person. At the hospital, Brad and Beth took the children aside while medical staff treated their father. They were obviously very upset, and after seeing their mother, they were confused and distraught. After Jason was treated, he was placed in a private room and allowed visitors, although he was still unconscious. When he wakes up, he'll be fine. He may have a terrible headache and feel unwell for a while, but otherwise he should be fine. We had to pump his stomach, so his throat will be a little sore for a few days. We gave him a couple of shots and kept him on enrollment 4 to restore fluids and electrolytes, the young doctor on duty told them. "Thanks, Doc, that's good news." Elizabeth responded with a sigh of relief, hugging her children close to her. After the doctor left, they all stood next to Jason, Karen refusing to let go of his hand. Patrick stood behind his sister, his hands on her shoulders, comforting her as she sat in the chair, clutching her father's hand. They copied Elizabeth and Brad, doing the same thing, although Elizabeth leaned closer, whispering something in her brother's ear and kissing him tenderly on the cheek. The bond between her and her brother was very strong, so strong that even Brad admitted that he would always have to share his wife's love with him, and he was okay with that. He knew all too well the history of both of them and what they had suffered at the hands of both parents, and he understood how it bound them together. Brad. I'm just going to get us a couple drinks, okay, baby? I whispered to my wife. She nodded and patted my hand as I looked at these poor, devastated children. I left the room and headed to the front desk, where I knew I could buy a couple of juices for the kids and coffee for Beth. Walking down the corridor, I heard some noise ahead. When I got there, I was initially shocked, which turned into anger when I saw Sarah standing there crying with everyone looking at her. I walked over and stood next to John and Mike, the officers on duty. "What's going on here, John?" "Hello, Sergeant. It seems that this person," he spat, "thinks that she even has the right to see the person she placed here," John replied with contempt in his voice. This only made Sarah cry more, and the surrounding staff became worried. I thought I needed to defuse the situation before it became a public spectacle, so I grabbed Sarah by the elbow, perhaps too roughly, and led her into a small room off to the side of the reception area. I knew it was there and often used to deliver bad news, which can often happen in a hospital. I directed her to a chair and sat opposite her while she sobbed and moaned. I just stared at her, my years of police service taking their toll, as it was easy for me to remain emotionless while I waited. Eventually, she seemed to calm down. "What are you doing here, Sarah? Haven't you done enough? How did you even know he was here?" I said in a quiet, neutral tone. "I got a call from the hospital. Is he okay? What's happened? I need to see him, Brad. I need to explain. Tell him I'm really sorry. I love him. I want to see my children. Happens to their father. Can I see my kids, Brad, please?" she muttered. "PFFT, do you love him? Are you seriously going to say that after everyone now knows what you did? Is this your love for him?" I shook my head in disgust. "Just go away, Sarah. No one wants to hear your bullshit about love and devotion or whatever you call it." I sighed. "You're welcome, Brad. Please, I do not know what to do. I don't know how to fix this. Is he okay?" He drank himself into unconsciousness, but thank God he will recover. "Unfortunately, your children know all too well what's going on, Sarah. They saw footage of you and your lovers on Jason's computer when they found him." Sarah groaned when she heard this and cowered, crying into her hands. "They don't want to see you, Sarah, and your presence here means you are in violation of the restriction order, so you need to leave." "Oh my God, my children saw me like this. They will never forgive me. Everything is destroyed. I was so stupid. I can't believe it's gone this far. A nightmare. And what that bastard Derek did, I will never forgive him." This last statement piqued my interest. There was something a little strange about him. "What do you mean, Sarah? What did Derek do?" "You already saw what he did, Brad. I didn't even know he was there." Can you at least tell me why, Sarah? I just can't understand why you did this. Why did you give it all up for this?" Sarah looked at me. She was a mess. Her eyes were red. Her cheeks stained with tears were red and blotchy from intense emotions. Her once beautiful hair was disheveled and dirty. Until that moment, I had always thought that Sarah was a rare beauty. She was 5'7", with hair down to the middle of her back, sparkling brown eyes, clear and unblemished skin as far as I could see. Her body was perfectly round, with a flat stomach, even after 2 children, full and firm breasts with a perfect tapering to the waist and on her curved hips. Her bottom was soft and round with the perfect amount of quivering and swaying as she walked. Yes, she was a real beauty, but now I couldn't see any of that. Now there was only contempt and disgust and a real feeling of sadness for what we all lost. Sarah. I looked at Brad and thought about my life now. Things were getting out of control, and I had to try to right the sinking ship. I took a deep breath and started from the beginning. Claire and I have been working hard on our part of the company expansion project, which was completed about 6 weeks ago. After weeks of research, planning, writing, and rewriting, we were happy to have it finished, ready to hand over to Daniel. To celebrate, Claire brought out a bottle of champagne, and we quickly drank a glass, taking off our shoes and relaxing. We chatted about work and life, even some personal things. While working on the project, we spent a lot of time together and talked openly about many things, even some very personal ones. Claire was in a very happy and energetic mood, which surprised me a little as I was just feeling exhausted. As I poured myself another glass, I couldn't help but feel the influence of the champagne. Living with Jason, I hardly ever drink, so 2 glasses of champagne were already starting to take effect, especially after missing lunch. On the third, and I told Claire it was my last, I felt a little cheerful and relaxed. One day, I spilled some drink on my blouse, and before I knew what was happening, Claire was leading me to the executive toilet. "Oh my God, Sarah, look at these. They're so big and full," Claire exclaimed, looking at my breasts, now half exposed in my wet blouse. Seeing where she was looking, I blushed and tried to cover myself, but Claire held my wrists to stop me. "God, don't be shy, Sarah. If I had a pair like this, I would never hide them," Claire laughed. I giggled. Not bad for a woman who had 2 kids, I guess. "Are you kidding? Look at my poor little things," Claire said, lifting and pushing her breasts. "I also had 2 children, and mine are nothing like yours," she sighed. "I need to get a better look at them," she added before quickly unbuttoning my blouse, leaving me in my bra, which was also wet. I laughed while it all happened, feeling a little drunk and very relaxed with Claire by this time. The next moment she unclasped the front of my bra and stood still, just staring at my bare breasts. With her manipulations, combined with champagne, I couldn't resist. That night I made love to Jason so passionately that he fell asleep with a huge smile on his face. I knew it was out of guilt, but I needed to confirm for myself who I loved and why. The next day Claire acted like she always did, and it seemed like yesterday was just an aberration that we would just ignore. Until evening came. I was leaning next to Claire, looking through the documents, when I felt her hand slowly and softly slide along the inside of my thigh, just like the previous day. "Oh my God, Claire, what are you doing to me? I can't do this." And this was the beginning of my romance with Claire. I had a little fling with my girlfriend at school, but nothing like this. I don't know why I did it, but I dealt with the guilt by telling myself that I wasn't cheating with another man or taking time or sex away from Jason or my kids, so it was harmless to me. Problems started to arise when Claire said she wanted to have an early lunch outside the office and took me to a small motel nearby. She was a little too affectionate and intimate for a public place, and we barely made it into the room before she started attacking me. From there, I recognized the photographs that I saw in Jason's video, not from the first time, but from one of the subsequent visits. How could I be so frivolous? In fact, we went to that motel 5 times, and each time our encounters became less and less satisfactory, well, at least for me. Claire became more and more demanding and wanted to go further sexually. Then came the critical moment when she came to my house 3 weeks ago on a Saturday morning. Jason was on a golf day with Daniel and several other people, including a judge, a politician, a police commissioner, and several important businessmen, to name a few. My kids were with their grandparents, so I had a home to myself for the first time in months and planned a personal care day. Around noon, there was a knock on the door. "Claire," I said, shocked. "What are you doing here?" I asked as she walked past me and entered the house with a bag and a huge, playful smile. "Are we alone?" she asked. "Yes, but why are you here? This is unacceptable. You can't just come to my house like this. I think." I gave in again, and we ended up in the bedroom having sex on my bed. On the very bed that I share with my husband. It was getting out of control. The next couple of weeks were a repeat of that weekend. I was also becoming increasingly frustrated with what we were doing, and I told Claire this. She looked dejected, but knowing that Jason would be at golf day again this coming weekend, we had a final goodbye meeting, so to speak. I sent the kids back to their grandparents for the day, and Claire came as planned. We had the usual sex. Then someone joined us. To my shock and humiliation, I saw the grinning face of Derek Wilson as he began to have sex with me. I stood up in pain and looked down at Claire without saying a word. She disgusted me, and I wanted her out of my life. I am not an available girl, and I am not going to continue this depravity and humiliation anymore. I got into the shower and began to peel away as much of my shame and guilt as I could in a desperate attempt to rid myself of my shame. When I got out of the shower, luckily Claire was nowhere to be found. I looked at my marital bed and began to cry, taking off the bed linen and erasing the evidence of my shame. That day, I took the children and spent several hours with them, trying to drown out my guilt. When Jason came home, everything seemed a little strange. I thought it was my fault and my guilt causing this. I tried to cuddle with him that night, but he seemed distracted and spent a lot of time in his office. Yesterday was similar, although Jason spent an unusual amount of time in his office on the phone or going out to run errands. I felt more and more uneasy as the distance between us quickly increased. I was still sick from the previous attack, and I felt a little nervous around my family, especially Jason. Towards the end of the day, I became more and more depressed. Does he really feel what I did? Is my guilt noticeable? He has known me better than anyone for 16 years. Does he see my soul and turn away from what he sees? I started to get more and more worried. He did not come near me, did not touch me, hardly spoke to me, avoided me in every possible way. And then today came, and here we are. Brad, I watched as Sarah took a deep breath and wiped her eyes after finishing her story about the fall. She shook her head and sighed. How could I do this? How could I be so stupid and selfish, Brad? I threw away my husband, my family, my life. The kids must hate me, she said with tears running down her face. All I could do was look at her. Part of me wanted to swear and be angry at her for this very stupidity and selfishness. She really threw everything away for a little girl affair that got out of control, but she let it all happen until Derek fucked her. And honestly, the pain she felt at that moment was well-deserved. I think you should leave now, Sarah. Your presence here will only complicate the situation, I said with a hint of hostility. She nodded slowly and looked at me longingly. Please tell Jason, my children, that I'm sorry, that I love them, that I need them. Please, Brad. I won't do this, Sarah. None of them, none of us, are in the emotional state to tolerate you or your words right now. I won't even tell them you are here so as not to hurt them knowing this. Her eyes filled with pain and sadness as she slowly stood up. I understand, she almost whispered, walking with faltering steps towards the door. I followed her and was about to walk her to the front door when I heard, "What are you doing here? We saw what you did. How could you do this to Dad? You almost killed him. I hate you. I hate you." We both turned to see Patrick standing in the hallway, anger etched on his red face, screaming at his mother. Sarah howled and collapsed to the floor. "Sorry, baby, sorry," she answered pitifully, sitting on the floor, shaking and crying. "I hate you. I never want to see you again, ever," he screamed as Mike and John picked him up and led him back to his father's room. "I hate you," were the last words we heard as they turned the corner. I looked down at Sarah, and she was curled up in a ball on the floor, now just sobbing. Before I could do anything, a couple of nurses arrived, helping her up as she muttered incoherently and unintelligibly. They all disappeared into the nearest observation room, while I stood looking at the closed door. I looked around the reception area, and there were many shocked and puzzled faces looking at me. I took a deep breath and headed back to Jason's room. By now, Patrick had probably already told everyone that Sarah was here, which only made things worse for all of us. I walked past Mike and told him that Sarah was still here and where she was. Keep me informed of what's going on with her, and for God's sake, keep her away from them. No problem, boss. I can't believe this bitch came here, he muttered as he continued on his way. Mike was the one who took the photos of Sarah and Claire going in and out of the motel. Jason had come to see Sarah for lunch one day when he saw them leaving the building. He noticed that they were being too affectionate, as he told us, and something didn't seem right, so he followed them to the motel and watched, stunned, as they kissed and Claire grabbed Sarah's breasts as she entered the room. This led to a little undercover surveillance on the part of myself, John, and Mike, which led us to the revelation of their regular visits to the motel and Claire's first visit to Sarah's house. It was not difficult to obtain the necessary evidence, and Jason, being a technical expert, easily installed several cameras in the house. The rest, as they say, is history. We got photos and Jason got video, but we didn't know about Derek until he was spotted by John sneaking into the back of the house about 45 minutes after Claire arrived. At the very least, it confirmed Sarah's story that she had no knowledge of Derek's presence or involvement. Still, cheating remains cheating, and does it matter whether it's with a man or a woman? Cheating is cheating, and when trust is broken, where does that leave the relationship? I took a deep breath as I walked into Jason's room, knowing it wouldn't be easy. Surprisingly, the room was relatively calm. Beth was still sitting on one side, holding Jason's hand, Karen was on the other, and a very tense Patrick stood behind his sister, softly stroking her hair. This puzzled me a little. John stood at the back wall and beckoned me over. He's a smart boy, Brad. He knew that if Beth and Karen found out that Sarah was here, they would only be more upset, so he kept it to himself. "I'm just here for moral support," he whispered. I nodded and looked at Patrick with admiration. He was definitely his father's son. As I looked around the room, it suddenly occurred to me that this was similar to what Beth and Jason had experienced. One of the parents cheats and destroys the other. Children are forced to bear the burden of pain and family breakdown. A tear crept down my cheek as I looked at my wife and wondered how she was coping, how these kids would cope if Jason followed his mother's path. No, Jason was better than this, just a slight detour, a desperate attempt to avoid the pain of betrayal. We won't let this be the end of him. Jason, Jason, honey, can you hear me? I heard a voice trying to break through my foggy and painful brain. Who was it, and where am I? My eyes struggled to open, and the light hurt as I did so, before I felt rather than saw it being turned off. My head hurt, and my mouth was dry as the desert. And what's wrong with my throat? It hurt terribly. As my eyes opened again, I slowly began to focus on my surroundings. Dad, are you awake? Oh, Dad, you scared me. I'm so happy you're awake. I heard Karen sob and squeeze my hand. Oh, Jason, you're such an idiot. Beth was nearby, crying and clutching her other hand. I'll go get the doctor. I recognized John's voice as the door opened and closed again. Damn, my head hurts, I wheezed. Then a straw appeared in my mouth. Serves you right, big brother. I should slap you for scaring us like that. I chuckled, oh Beth, always soft when she was angry. Don't you dare smile at me. I can't lose you, she said, hugging me tightly. Karen and Patrick then joined in as my children also expressed their joy and anger at the same time. Sorry, I said sadly, ashamed of what he had apparently put his family through. At this point, the doctor came in and after examining me announced that I would be able to go home later that day once the current Roman 4 had finished and I was sufficiently hydrated again. When he left, we all sat in silence, the huge elephant in the room obviously being the reason. I looked around, seeing the faces of my children, and tears flowed from my eyes. I looked at Beth, and she almost looked at me with resentment, half angry, half happy, as if she couldn't decide. Brad was himself, solid, calm, and maybe a little wary, seeing where my mind is now, I think. We all sat and talked quietly for a while, but I noticed that Patrick was very quiet and seemed particularly angry. I spent a lot of time apologizing for scaring them all and assuring them that I wasn't going to do anything that stupid again, until there were a few chuckles as my stomach growled loudly. Looks like I'm ready to eat, I announced with a grin. Brad volunteered to go get something light from the cafeteria for me, as well as snacks for everyone else, which we all thought was a good idea. I'm not sure I could handle anything heavy right now, and given that my sister and kids weren't going to leave me at that point, it seemed like the only way I'd be fed. Brad. I left Jason's room to get him a sandwich or something light he could hold. I've had enough hangovers in my time to know that food is necessary, but if the food isn't right, well, I also wanted to check where Sarah was. If she was still here, I needed to get her out of here before Jason got out. I couldn't imagine what her presence would do to Jason and the kids, let alone Beth. She would want to rip her heart out right where she stood. Well, this might be a good place for it if she actually decides to do it, I chuckled to myself. I noticed that John was still sitting at the front desk, and of course this had nothing to do with a very attractive receptionist sitting there. I rolled my eyes and walked up to him. "Having fun, buddy?" I heard the young lady giggle as John jumped in surprise. "God, Sarge, don't do that. I just made sure we won't have the same problems we had before." "Uh-huh," I grinned, looking at him, and then at the pretty brown eyes behind the counter and back again. "By the way, where is the problem now?" I said, losing the amusement in my tone. "She's in the room over there." John nodded his head to the right. "She seems to be suffering from stress and anxiety, poor thing," he finished, dripping with sarcasm and contempt. "Okay, Jason's going to be released in a couple of hours, so I need you to keep an eye on her. I don't want them to cross paths with her while he's leaving. I'll let you know when we're ready to leave and ask you to go over there and make sure she's still there and not moving, okay?" "No problem, Brad. I have handcuffs if needed," he grinned. "Yeah, well, don't do anything stupid, okay?" I pressed. He nodded, and I left him to flirt while I headed to get Jason some snacks. Jason. "It's amazing how a simple cheese sandwich and some cold water can taste so good," I almost moaned. "Are you feeling better, Daddy?" asked my sweet little girl. "Yeah, baby, much better." I could still see the sadness and fear in her eyes when I looked at her. "I'm so sorry I scared you, baby," I whispered to her. Her brows furrowed and her lips pouted. "Don't ever do that again, Daddy. I can't lose you," she said as tears slowly streamed down her face. I wiped them off and tried to get up. "Where are you going?" Karen almost screamed. Baby, Daddy needs to go to the bathroom," I said, embarrassed, but not really. "Oh, well, let me help you," she squeaked. I raised an eyebrow and looked at her. It only took a few seconds before she realized. "No, Dad, it's not that," she screamed, embarrassed, covering her face with her hands. Everyone had a good laugh at her expense as she tried to explain that we all knew what she meant. "I meant that I would help you out of bed," she said, now muffled, with her head buried in my chest. "I know, baby. It's okay. We're all mean, aren't we?" I said, stroking her hair. "Yes, and you're the meanest of them all," she said, leaning back and slapping my arm with a big smile on her face. Finally, it was time to leave. The doctor signed my papers, and I got dressed in the shirt and shorts I wasn't wearing yesterday. I slept most of the night, so Beth and Brad took the kids home to get cleaned up, get some sleep, and come back today. Obviously, I got myself really dirty. Another feeling of guilt that will have to be borne for a while, I suppose. At this stage, I really couldn't talk openly as my children never left me alone, and it became clear to me that they never asked why their mother wasn't here or seemed surprised that I was here. They never asked questions about what I did or why, and it was starting to make me a little nervous. I wondered how much they knew and how it would all really affect them. I had been feeling pretty foggy for most of the day, but now my head is clearer. I stood by the bed, the privacy curtain around me, and I felt my emotional strength begin to weaken. I suppressed the emotions of my lost life for the sake of my children, but now it was becoming increasingly difficult. I was so tired and probably lonely. I felt lonely. I had this perfect life, or so I thought, and now it's gone. Tears began to stream down my face as I stared at the emptiness that now stood before me. My eyes closed for a moment, but that only allowed the images of my wife and her lovers to become clear, and I sobbed, dropping my head onto my chest. "Oh, Jason, I'm here, honey. I'm here," I heard Elizabeth sigh as she wrapped her arms around my waist and held me tightly to her. Then came a pair of small and gentle hands on my part. "Everything will be fine, Dad. Let's go home, okay?" I opened my red eyes and looked into the faces of two beautiful ladies hugging me. I smiled sadly at the thought of home. What is this house like now without Sarah? I'm broken about what she did, but I loved her for 16 wonderful years, her and no one else. We had what I thought was the perfect relationship, the perfect life, but now where am I? I'm approaching 39, thinking about divorce, possibly selling the house, joint custody, and maybe starting over with someone new. Crap. Why did she do this? Why wasn't I good enough for her? Come on, Dad. It's time to go. Patrick's firm voice brought me out of my thoughts. God, how lucky I am to have these children, I smiled to myself. We all walked into our house, and the first thing I noticed was how quiet and empty it was. The smell of pine was in the air, and at first it confused me. I had to clean up some vomit in your office, Beth said quietly, squeezing my hand. Oh, I see. Sorry about that, I groaned sadly. It was already after lunch, so we went to the kitchen, where everyone got something to eat and drink. Sitting at the table, I looked at the kids and had to ask, Patrick, Karen, how much do you know? I saw them tense, looking at each other and then at the table, avoiding my eyes and, I'm sure, wanting to avoid the topic. Jason, is this the right time? Beth said softly. I think this is the right time, Beth. I need to know what direction to go in, and I can't do that without knowing that you all know. Besides, you and Brad being there for support right now is very important. I saw the way Brad nodded and squeezed Beth's hand when I said that. I looked back at the kids and Patrick looked at me with a mixture of emotions on his face. We know Mom cheated on you, Dad. We saw the computer screen when we found you after school. My head fell into my hands and the tears began to flow again. Oh God, I'm really, really sorry that you saw that. I never wanted you to see that. So you saw what your mother was doing and found your father, drunk, in a puddle of his own vomit. God, maybe it's going to get worse now. I looked up at my children and saw sadness in their eyes. It's okay, Dad. We understand why you did it, Karen whispered as tears rolled out of her eyes. Yes, because Mom is a cheater and is trying to kill you the same way Grandpa killed Grandma. I hate her. I hope she dies. I never want to see her again, Patrick shouted, stood up and ran upstairs to his room. A loud slam of the door signaled that he had arrived. The others just sat there in shock, I think. Karen cried, jumping into my lap, bringing me to my senses. Beth and Brad just looked at me, at each other, at the stairs and back at me, not knowing what to do or say. I sat quietly, holding my daughter and trying to calm her fears and pain, trying to take it all in. It was hard enough dealing with Sarah's betrayal, but I was unprepared for how much my children knew and how they suffered too. Damn it, Sarah, did you ever think about anyone other than yourself when you did this? I knocked on the door twice. Son, can we talk? I waited, then heard a growl that I interpreted as, Sure, Dad, please come in and let's talk about this like adults. Well, that's how I interpreted it, so I walked into his room and saw him face down on the bed, head under the pillow. I sat up and put my hand on his shoulder. Come on, buddy, I know you don't want to right now, but we need to talk about this. Unfortunately, this isn't going away anytime soon. I waited a few moments, then he slowly turned over and began to look at the ceiling. I saw that he was crying, but now he tried to pretend to be invulnerable. How could she do this to us, Dad? How could she be such a bitch? He said furiously. Stop, Patrick. I know you don't think so, but she's still your mother, and she loves you and Karen with all her heart. How can you say that, Dad? How can you protect her after what she did? With two other people in your bed. Don't you hate her, Dad? Because I hate her. I never want to see her again. She disgusts me. She didn't just cheat on you, she cheated on all of us. Now we all have to suffer for this. Karen and I will never be able to get rid of this image of her with these two people, he said, roughly rubbing his face with his hands. I wish you didn't have to see that, son. You both didn't deserve to see your mother like that. It wasn't fair to both of you. It was entirely my fault, and I will regret it for the rest of my life. And you shouldn't have to deal with this now. But unfortunately, this is our situation, and we have to deal with it as best we can. I'm sure you're old enough to understand that things will probably be complicated now. We'll be getting a divorce and may have to sell the house and divide up the property. You and Karen will probably spend time alternately with your mother and me. No way, Dad. I'll never talk to her, let alone spend time with her. I fucking hate her, he blurted out. Son, she is still your mother, and you need to remember that, I said firmly. Patrick simply rolled over and put the pillow over his head. This conversation was over. I patted him on the shoulder, squeezed it, and then walked out with a heavy heart. I love you, son, he muttered in response. This was beyond my competence. I didn't even deal with my own feelings, let alone know how to deal with my children's feelings. Damn, I really ruined everything. It was so stupid to lose control and get drunk. Now look where this has gotten the kids. I guess Sarah isn't the only selfish one here after all. The next few days were spent calming the children down and getting them back to school. I had work to do to keep my mind occupied. I made a vow to myself that I would never let my children down again. I'm an adult, and these are adult issues that need to be dealt with, and I will do everything I can to undo the damage they have caused. I took the time to remove my name from bank accounts and move money into separate accounts in my name. I split the money equally and did everything I could to protect my business as much as possible. The joint credit cards have been canceled and paid off. Sarah will now manage her own money. I don't care. Well, that's a lie. It hurts me to have to sort my life out like that. You just don't throw away all that love for someone. Well, at least I couldn't. I admit that during this time I cried like a baby several times while sitting in the car in random parking lots during my trips. I met with my divorce lawyer and we began the divorce process. Adultery was given as the reason, and we ended up filing Sarah's papers with her parents since I didn't know where she was living now. Brad told me about the incident at the hospital, and I felt sad that she was so upset about it. But I was also glad that she realized what she had done and how much pain she had caused us all. It only took a few days, but I felt like I was on the right track. Unfortunately, I had weeks of preparation for this inevitability, but what I saw in this video was unexpected and more painful than I expected. Now I know, at least, that this was not planned and was not desired by Sarah. I think she only wanted to cheat with one person at a time. How kind of her. The hardest time was at night when I was lying in the bed, on the new one I bought, along with the new bedding sets. I made the mistake of buying a king-size bed to replace a queen. We always wanted one, but now that I have it, it seemed too big for me alone, and then I missed having my wife next to me. I know I'm an idiot, but I still loved her and felt an emptiness in my life, now that she was gone. 2 weeks passed when my lawyer called me. Sarah's lawyer insisted and gained access to the children, which we agreed to. We agreed that Sarah would come and pick them up at 10 a.m. on Saturday and return them on Sunday afternoon at 4 p.m. When I told the kids, Karen was quiet and Patrick, well, he was the opposite. I talked to both of them about the need to try to forgive my mother and move on in life and have a relationship with her, that she loved them and missed them, etc. But Patrick wasn't interested. The day it was supposed to happen, I was very nervous, my heart was racing, I was sweating, and my stomach was churning. I hadn't seen Sarah for 2 weeks and didn't know how I would react to seeing her. When she arrived, she looked nervous as she got out of the car and took a deep breath before walking to the door. She rang the bell and I waited. I don't know why, I just waited. I looked back and saw a very hesitant Karen standing by the stairs with her overnight bag. She looked so sad and fragile that it almost broke my heart. I didn't know where Patrick was, but I assumed he was in his room. The bell rang again, and with sweaty palms and a tightness in my chest, I opened the door and looked at my wife for the first time since I saw her through very drunk and teary eyes 2 weeks ago. I heard her sigh as the door opened, and we stood looking at each other, unable to find words that made sense. My heart stopped and my head was in turmoil. I realized then that I still loved my wife, and I hated every fiber of my being for that confession. I didn't even notice a tear slowly rolling down my cheek as I looked at her. Her eyes, blood red with tears, looked at me, and I could see how they reflected the pain she knew she was causing. She lowered her head and sobbed, her breathing ragged and ragged. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. Please." She looked at me pleadingly. I blinked a few times and calmed down, feeling the pain in my chest intensify. "Karen, Patrick, your mother is here. It's time to go, I shouted, turning away and walking into the house, leaving Sarah crying behind me. I took a few deep breaths and sighed heavily, running my fingers through my hair. Karen slowly walked towards me, and I hugged her tightly. Have a good time with Mommy, baby. See you tomorrow. Love you. I love you too, Dad. You're not mad that I'm coming, are you? Angry? Why should I be angry, honey? I asked in confusion. I don't want you to think that I'm betraying you by leaving with her, she cried. Oh, honey, no. I never would have thought that. You love your mom, and your mom loves you very much. It can never be wrong or bad, okay? Now go have a good time, and not too much chocolate, okay? I said, hugging her tightly. She smiled and hugged me back. I love you, Dad. I love you too, baby, I smiled. Dad, you know I'm too big to be called that. Never, I answered, tickling her sides. I turned to escort Karen out the door and saw Sarah standing at the entrance, tears streaming freely down her face. Thank you, she whispered to me as Karen approached her. I was a little sad that Karen didn't try to really hug her mother, and Sarah sensed it by simply nodding her head, saying something quietly under her breath. Patrick, where are you? It's time to go, I shouted upstairs. Patrick walked out of his room and down the stairs, looking as hostile as he had lately. I noticed he didn't have a bag as he walked past me and out the door, not paying attention to his mother. I thought he was walking towards her car, but as we all walked out the door, we saw him get on his bike and ride away. Patrick, what are you doing? I shouted. Your mother is here to take you for the weekend. Not interested, was his only answer as he left. I was a little stunned, but unfortunately not too surprised. From the very beginning, he was very categorical in his unwillingness to see his mother. Next to me, Karen took my hand, listening to Sarah cry loudly as she sat on the step by the door. I looked at Karen, then at her mother. Crap, what to do now? Dad, I don't want to go alone. What if Mom brings those people and they do something? I don't want to be there for that. I won't go. Please don't force me. She was almost hysterical. I heard a loud sigh and then a painful groan. Crap. It's worse than I thought when I looked over Karen's head and saw Sarah collapse on the ground, crying openly. Apparently, she heard what our daughter said, and it destroyed her. Damn it, I'm the one who should be destroyed and curled up into a ball. How dare she take this away from me now? Hasn't she already taken enough from me, from us? Mom would never do anything like that when you're with her, honey, I said, trying to be calm even though I wasn't, casting a quick, disgusted glance at Sarah. Oh God, Karen, baby, I'll never, ever do anything like that again. I'm so sorry for what I did. Please, baby, I love you so much, I'll never do that to you, Sarah almost moaned. Karen stood in my arms and looked intently at her mother. You did this to Dad. You should have loved him too, but you did it anyway, didn't you, Mom? She hissed, breaking away from my embrace and rushing past her crying mother, lying on the ground with her head down. I silently watched her disappear before I heard the door slam, and then there was only Sarah's sobbing to fill the void. I honestly didn't know what to do here, how to prepare for all the upheaval and emotional turmoil caused by the person currently having a nervous breakdown on your lawn. I still can't believe I didn't experience this myself. Don't get me wrong, I cried and screamed, begging to any god or power that this wasn't true in any way. But it was true, and when I woke up every morning, it was all still there, and the pain was there, and my children's pain was there, and I had to be there for them. I had to dig a hole for this bitch, and push her in there. She made it. It was all her fault, and yet I had to hold on for all of us, even her right now. Damn it. I felt my hands clenched into fists and relaxed as the tension began to build within me. I looked at Sarah and took a deep, heavy breath as I approached her. A big part of me felt heartache for what we had all become. The innocence of my children was lost forever, and my life felt empty as I stood over the man I considered the love of my life. Tears streamed down my face. I hope you're happy. Perhaps your lovers can ease your pain with a good fuck, I said, my voice devoid of emotion as I looked at her. Sarah didn't even look at me as she started crying even louder again. "Go away," I finally said, returning to the house and closing the door. Almost an hour passed before I noticed that her sobbing had stopped, and then I heard her car pull out of the driveway. During this time, I had a chance to talk to Karen, and after many tears, she decided that ice cream and a movie would be the best way to pass the time. Patrick was gone most of the day and didn't return until late in the afternoon. We all sat around the table and talked about what had happened that morning, and after a lot of convincing, I was able to calm them both down and get them both to agree to try and be kind to their mother the next time she picked them up in 2 weeks. Things somehow returned to normal over the next 2 weeks. The kids went back to school and I went back to work. I had a business, but luckily my staff was able to handle the workload while I sorted things out. I ignored many messages and calls from friends and family as the news spread, so I took the time to respond to as many people as possible. Daniel and I had several long conversations as I went through the ups and downs that were to be expected. He was a good support, both he and Donna, his wife, and they couldn't understand why Sarah did it. Of course, Beth and Brad were regular visitors to both my home and my work. I saw that they were worried and supported me. Beth relaxed a little next to me. The fear that I would go back to being stupid had diminished, but I knew she would never let her guard down. As she said, she loves me too much and relies on me too much to completely stop caring. I just wish she'd give in to Brad and have a couple kids before it's too late. I also knew that deep down, what happened to our parents had a huge impact on her psyche, and she was afraid that the same would happen to her. It took her a long time to trust someone, but Brad broke through her defenses and won her heart. Sarah's next weekend came, and again, I couldn't look at her without a tear sliding down my cheek. Sarah simply looked at the ground after that and waited patiently for the children. Although it was clearly uncomfortable, the children got into her car anyway, and I watched them drive away. Karen looked down at her knees, and Patrick just stared out the window bitterly. Now I had 2 days alone, and I was even more lost than before. I realized that I was counting on the support and love of my children in the same way that they seemed to rely on me. I decided to go to the office on Saturday and catch up on some work, and spent Sunday doing some minor repairs around the house. I really enjoyed this time and felt good about getting a lot of those little things done that I had been putting off for months. I cleaned up and was watching TV when I heard Sarah's car pull into the driveway. I opened the door and watched them all get out of the car together. Pat just walked right up to me and said hi as he walked into the house, ignoring the "Bye, Pat, I love you, mother." I saw defeat on her face as she sighed, then turned to Karen, who stood a few steps away from her. Sarah stepped forward with the obvious intention of hugging her. "Bye, Mom," Karen said, and quickly walked away towards the house while Sarah shouted after her, "Bye, honey, I love you." Karen stopped and looked at her mother with curiosity, almost a question, before continuing into the house, giving me a hug and a kiss on the cheek with a "Hey, Dad, I missed you." Sarah just stood there motionless, staring after her until a wave of emotion crossed her face. Slowly, she looked at me and our eyes met. "Was it worth it?" I sighed, shaking my head as I turned and walked towards the house. "I'm sorry, Jason. I'm so sorry," she shouted after me when I walked in and closed the door in front of her. "The children told me that their mother lives with a friend and shares a house because she cannot afford her own place. It was small, and the children had to share a room because Patrick refused to sleep in his mother's bed so the girls could sleep together. Pat made it clear that he didn't want to risk anything, which of course led to Sarah's tears, and Karen seemed happier sharing a room with her brother under the current circumstances. Oh yeah, she was suspended without pay when all this came out. I didn't know the friend, but the kids said she seemed nice enough and felt the need to reassure me that it wasn't Claire, although I shouldn't have cared anymore, but I still didn't worry for long. Our savings weren't high when we split up as we had recently renovated our kitchen, so we only had a few thousand each, which mostly went towards paying lawyers in my case, so I assumed Sarah had the same situation. Fortunately for me, I had my own business and a stable income thanks to it. Sarah, I was told, worked part-time as a secretary in a small company where the main employee was on maternity leave. Sarah did not try to make financial demands on me at this time. I think her guilt over what she did to our family got in the way. Life continued like this for the next few months, without much change except that we were becoming a little more comfortable with each other about handing over the kids. Karen softened her attitude toward her mother, and they would briefly laugh and hug when they met and said goodbye. Even Patrick said hello and bye, although he still refused to touch her. I could see it was hurting Sarah, but she deserved it, right? One day, after dropping off the kids, Sarah followed Karen to the house and came up to me standing at the door. "Jason," she said very carefully, "is there a chance that we could talk sometime? Just the two of us," she finished quietly. I stood there in shock, not knowing how to respond. I felt my heart pounding, and my breathing almost stopped as I just blinked blankly at her. Is she serious? I don't want to talk to her, do I? I had a big question I wanted to ask. Why? Although getting an answer was pointless since it wouldn't change anything. Right? Sarah just stood there and waited patiently, looking for something in my eyes. I don't know what exactly. She wouldn't have seen anything because I'm sure my brain was shutting down at that moment. I finally blinked and sighed, letting the air out slowly as I stepped back and closed the door, leaving her standing outside. I heard a sob and a muffled, "I love you," before I turned and walked further into the house, where I sat quietly at the kitchen table. What the hell? Sarah didn't try to talk to me again, thankfully, but 3 weeks later, when we attended our first divorce hearing, her lawyer petitioned the court for counseling. Although my lawyer protested very loudly that I had no interest in trying to save the marriage, the judge ordered us to undergo counseling and let the psychologist decide how long to continue the sessions based on the results. So basically, I had to sit in a room with Sarah and listen to her bullshit about how she was sorry. Well, I didn't need to talk, and I didn't want to participate in anything that would imply my agreement with it. And that's exactly how our first session went. The psychologist, Megan, was a pleasant woman, about 50, slightly gray hair, sort of like a motherly figure. She explained why we were here and that she hoped we could take some positive steps toward forgiveness and moving forward for everyone's sake. I sat with a neutral expression for most of the session. I didn't say a word. Childish behavior, some will say, but screw it. I didn't want to be there. I was forced to be there. Sarah, as I expected, followed the script, cried, apologized, and complained that it was a mistake and that she still loved me. When she tried to explain how it happened, it was the first time I reacted to something being said. I stood up, looked at my cheating wife with disgust, looked at the psychologist with contempt, and walked out the door. I heard both women try to call me back, but I wasn't going to listen to Sarah try to justify her actions. 2 weeks later, on the strong advice of my lawyer, I saw a psychologist again, this time alone. "So, Jason, you seemed a little upset the last time I saw you. I hope you're feeling a little calmer today," she smiled warmly. I just sat and looked at her with the same blank and indifferent expression that I had 2 weeks ago when I sat in the same chair. She waited patiently, obviously expecting me to answer, but I had no intention of doing so. The sooner everyone realizes that I'm not going to be part of this farce and allows me to get a divorce so I can move on, the better it will be for everyone concerned. After a couple of minutes of her looking at me expectantly before eventually sighing heavily and hopefully giving up, she made a note in the book on her lap and continued talking to me no matter what. Things like closure, forgiveness, children's relationship with their mother, co-parenting, etc. were discussed, but as soon as she started saying how much Sarah loved me, I left the office again. It took 2 more sessions in which I refused to talk to her, for the psychologist to finally give up. I didn't do anything wrong. Sarah ruined our relationship. She cheated on me behind my back. She broke her vows and promises. She took trust and love out of my life. She did all this and more, not me, but it looked like I was at fault and I was being made to suffer even more for a crime I didn't commit. My children and I were victims in all of this, and no one will change my mind about this. Finally, we returned to court, and the judge was critical of my refusal to participate in sessions with a psychologist and while I stood there with the same blank expression, my lawyer seemed to convey to him that I had done nothing wrong and did not want anything to do with Sarah or her explanations. The longer this went on, the harder my position became, and it was clear that I was not going to consider reconciling with my ex-wife. These images of her betrayal stayed with me forever. They were burned into my memory and came to me every time I closed my eyes, as if I were in the room and watching it all live. I was so damn tired and just wanted it all to go away so I could get back to the semblance of life and move forward. I'm still relatively young, and during all of this, I went back to the gym, which was a lifesaver. I needed to let go of my anger, and by doing this, I lost weight and improved my fitness a bit. After the divorce was finalized, I cannot say that life became better for me or for the children. We persevered bravely, but there were many times when one or more of us were clearly upset about something from our old pre-cheating lives. I kept the house and my business because Sarah wanted very little. I think her guilt was again the main driving factor in her compliance with what I proposed. I rearranged some finances to give her half the equity in the house, which allowed her to find a decent 3-bedroom apartment to rent and modestly furnish it, the children told me. Karen softened her position towards her mother, but Patrick firmly stood his ground. He couldn't forgive Sarah for what she did to me or to our once happy family. I knew this hurt Sarah deeply, as she and Patrick had a strong relationship before all of this. I heard through the grapevine that Claire's husband kicked her out too, but he didn't handle custody that well as Claire got custody a few weeks later. I felt sorry for him as once again the innocent victim seems to be punished the most. Derek, on the other hand, didn't cope at all. His wife immediately kicked him out and filed for divorce, ensuring that she and her 2 brothers secretly made his life hell. I dropped the lawsuit against Daniel and his business, but continued with the lawsuits against Claire and Derek for destroying love. Claire and Derek admitted to a long-term affair and pursued Sarah for sex and arranged a threesome for her without her knowledge. Because Claire was the children's primary caregiver, the judge was a little lenient, but still awarded several $100,000 in damages. Derek, after settling his divorce, was then completely financially ruined by the award. I didn't really need that money. I was just being a vindictive bastard and making those who helped destroy my marriage and my family pay for what they did and leave them with little opportunity to do it to someone else, hopefully. I met up with Claire's ex-husband Leonard, and we had a few drinks together. Well, he had tea and I had tea. No more alcohol for me, thank you. We discussed his financial situation, and I helped use some of the money to create funds for his children's education. The rest I just gave to him to help him get back on his feet. We became good friends through all of this and still are. I also met with Derek's ex-wife, but she didn't want to take the money I received. She felt she had been compensated enough and was just glad that Derek was now broke and struggling to find a new job. Such things spread quickly among the upper echelons of the business world, I can assure you. Daniel replaced Claire and Derek after the trials and at my daughter's request to help her mother, who seemed to be becoming increasingly depressed. I spoke to Daniel about Sarah returning to work. Naturally, he was initially against it, but I couldn't look into Karen's pleading eyes and disappoint her. She needed her mother, and she needed her to be happy for her sake. Thank you, Jason. I can't believe that after everything I've done, you would help me like that. Sarah nearly sobbed the week after she returned to work. I did this for our daughter, Saru. She needs her mother to be happy again. I know. I'm just trying to cope with what I did, what I lost, what I missed. I miss you, Jason. I miss us. I miss our family, she cried as she returned to her car to pick up the kids for the weekend. Sarah wasn't dating anyone like everyone told me, and I noticed a significant drop in her weight, which was starting to worry me. She seemed more and more depressed as time went on, and even Patrick began to show signs of anxiety. I decided that I needed to intervene and solve this situation before it became a real problem. I know a lot of people would think I was an idiot, but I still loved her, and she was the mother of my children. I couldn't let her continue down this path of darkness. I knew where it could lead, and I didn't want that for her or for any of us. Sarah, I said when she dropped off the kids a few weeks later. "Would you like to come over for a while?" Both children looked at me in surprise that I had made such a proposal. Sarah just stood there, eyes wide and mouth open in shock. I couldn't help myself as I pretended to be offended. "Well, if you're not interested, that's fine," I said, turning and winking at Karen, a smile on my face. "What? What? No, no, please, Jason, I'd really like to come in. Please." I heard the trembling in her voice when she tried not to cry. "Dad!" Karen almost stamped her foot. "Stop being so mean to Mom." I turned to give Sarah a half-smirking smile. "Would you like a cold drink? It was a hot day." With a hopeful look on her face, Sarah smiled shyly back. "Thank you. That would be wonderful," she said as a tear rolled down each cheek. Even now, I still thought she was the most beautiful woman, and I was tired of hating her. A lot of time has passed, but they say that it heals all wounds. I still couldn't forget, and I never will, but can I forgive? This is an interesting consideration. I think inviting her into what was once our family home was the start of that. It was very awkward as we all sat at the kitchen table quietly sipping our drinks. I could see the children's eyes darting from me to Sarah to each other. Sarah sat with her shoulders slightly slumped and looked around the room, noticing the changes that had occurred. Over the weekend, I repainted the house a bit to freshen it up and make it more me, I think. A lot of the clutter that existed disappeared and new furniture appeared. "I love what you did to the house, Jason. The new color scheme looks beautiful. I see you replaced some furniture too." Sarah tried to sound as normal as possible. I saw how much effort it took. "Thank you. We like it, don't we, the kids?" I said. "The kids chose the colors themselves, and I would like to say that they helped." "Boo-hoo." "Yes, we offered, but you said we'd just get in the way and ruin everything," Karen said, rolling her eyes at me. Patrick just grinned at me. The look in his eyes gave the impression that he knew I was worried about his mother, and that was why we were all here right now. Smart kid. "Mom, do you want to see my room?" asked Karen. "I would love to, darling, if your father doesn't mind." She looked at me questioningly. "Dad, everything is fine?" Karen said quietly with hope in her eyes. I paused for a moment and then smiled at my sweet little girl. "Of course, it's okay, honey," then turned to Sarah. "Feel free to look around." They both nearly split their heads from the smiles that broke out when Karen grabbed Sarah's hand and pulled her upstairs. "Are you sure about all this, Dad?" Patrick said as we listened to Karen chatter as they walked up the stairs. I shrugged and looked at my son. "I don't know, son, but look at your mother. She is wasting away from guilt and depression. You and Karen told me how sad she was and how she cried in her room all the time. I know what she did, and I know I can never forget it, but she is your mother, and what would I do if I allowed her to continue to get worse? What would this teach you and your sister? How would you look at me if it faded away and I let it? What kind of person would that make me?" Patrick just sat and silently thought about these things for a couple of minutes until we heard laughter coming from the top of the stairs as the girls came down. "You did a great job drawing Jason. I never would have thought of some of the colors you used, but they look wonderful, especially in your bedroom. I see you have a new bed too," Sarah said before a fog of sadness clouded her face. We all watched as tears welled up in her eyes, and she began to sob at the table. Karen quickly walked up to her mother and hugged her, and I handed her a tissue from a nearby box. Sarah looked at me, smiled faintly, and said, "Thank you," while wiping her face. And this was the beginning of a new stage in the relationship. Sarah began dropping off the kids and staying longer and longer over the next few months, eventually staying for dinner, and then dinner and family movie night. There was no intimacy between Sarah and me during this time, but the children and I noticed a noticeable improvement in her. Over time, she seemed to get happier, put on some weight, and although she was thinner than when this all started, it seemed like it actually suited her better. "Yeah, okay, now she looks more beautiful than ever." I admitted that I still loved her, and from time to time she would catch me looking at her with something close to longing as I still saw the woman I had fallen in love with. I would even blush when she caught me, as I saw her blush and smile shyly at me. The more time we spent together, the more comfortable I felt. "Sarah?" I asked one day, about 18 months after my world collapsed. "Yes," she replied, turning to me as she helped prepare the children's dinner after bringing them home one Sunday evening. "Would you like to go out to dinner with me one night?" I couldn't believe how calm I felt asking this. I think enough time passed that I forgave her and I still loved her. We spent more and more family time together, and in some ways it was the same as before all this happened. When those nights ended and she went home, I always felt sad and a little lonely. We always had such a good time together, and I enjoyed her company again. I watched and waited calmly, expectantly, even nervously, for an answer. Sarah just stared at me with wide eyes. Her breathing quickened, and her face flushed, and a few tears fell from her eyes. I watched as she hesitantly placed the knife on the cutting board and turned fully to face me. I could see many emotions on her face, but the predominant one seemed to be joy as she brought her hands to her face and cried openly. It wasn't the reaction I was hoping for, and to be honest, I was a little taken aback. Hearing their mother cry, Karen and Patrick came into the kitchen with worry on their faces. "What's happening? What's happened? What did you do, Dad?" I heard Karen's confused questions. "I'm not too sure, honey. I just asked Saw, your mom, if she wanted to go out to dinner one night, and she started crying. I'm not sure, yes or no," I said with a grin. Sarah's head shot up. "Yes, you big fool, that's true," she said almost irritably, walked up to me, hugged me around the waist, and pressed her body tightly against mine. I felt her body tremble with excitement, and her tears began to soak through my shirt. I hugged her, and Sarah began to sob louder and hugged me tightly. It was the first time we hugged each other, you know, and I must say that she was pleased to be in my arms again. Like Sarah, I hadn't dated anyone, and I missed it. I felt her warmth, her hard breasts on my chest. Tears streamed down Karen's cheeks, and her smile beamed at me. Even Patrick nodded at me approvingly and grinned back. I leaned over and kissed the top of Sarah's head, inhaling her scent, that special scent of Sarah that only she can create. This was home. My hands ran up and down her back as she pressed herself even closer to me, trying to merge with my body. It felt good, and I have to admit that after over 18 months of not having such a warm and sensual body, I, reacted a certain way. I couldn't help it, and frankly, I didn't want to. I heard a small sigh followed by a soft moan, coupled with a slight rocking of her pelvis as Sarah looked at me hopefully. I blushed and licked my lips because my mouth was dry. I looked at her for a couple of moments, kissed her forehead, and broke the hug we shared. "Well, how about Friday? Will I pick you up at 7? Wiping her eyes and smiling widely, Sarah nodded. "Great. Thank you, Jason." I looked at her and saw the depth of her feelings when she said that last thing. Dinner that evening was noticeably lighter, and I noticed that Sarah looked at me with adoration from time to time, sometimes with eyes close to tears. Karen and Patrick noticed this and smiled for the first time in a very long time. The week seemed to drag on, and as Friday approached, I started to get really nervous. It was like that first date back when I was in high school. I began to worry about what to wear, what to say, how to act. I had long ago forgiven Sarah, and although I could never forget it, I still loved her deeply. I knew her, all of her, for so long and so deeply that I could not let her go. I know she hurt me, and that pain resurfaces in the odd, quiet moments. But as time went on, it lessened, and we started talking again. And children become much happier and more balanced when they see their parents getting along again. They both saw a therapist, and I knew I saw a counselor, and so did Sarah. We are all on the path to improvement, and I feel good about my life again, something I honestly never thought I would ever be able to do again. I took a deep breath and calmed down as I stood there. My mind began to wander, and unfortunately, some uninvited thoughts did creep in, leaving me wondering if I was doing the right thing. Was this a mistake? Should I move on and start over? Start over. That in itself was scary. I stood quietly, contemplating all the possibilities of my life and what I wanted, where I wanted to go, and most importantly, who I wanted to go there with. My hand began to sweat, holding a small bouquet of flowers, lilies, Sarah's favorite, and time seemed to fly by quickly. I looked at my watch and realized that I had been standing there for more than 15 minutes, thinking through the problem. I took another calming breath and raised my hand to knock on the door. As soon as my hand touched the door, it swung open and Sarah stood there, tears streaming down her face. I thought you changed your mind. I thought that this time you would leave me forever. I was so scared that you thought it was a mistake. You just stood at my door forever. Please, do not go. Please, don't leave me, Jason. Please. This will kill me. Sarah almost collapsed into my arms. I entered her apartment and closed the door behind us. SHH, it's okay, Sarah. I'm here. We are here. I love you, Sarah. I've always loved you, and I want us to try again. Will this be okay? Sarah looked at me, looking for a lie or a game, but she knew it wasn't me. Yes, yes, yes. Oh God, yes. Sarah screamed as she hugged me, and we kissed with more fire and passion than I think we have at any point in our lives together. Suffice it to say that we didn't have time for dinner that evening. Honestly, we had sex like demons. What followed was the slow, passionate lovemaking we needed to help us reconnect and ease the wounds that had been caused. That night began a year-long affair with my ex-wife. We made love, experimented and played, but only with each other. We were freer with each other and more open, doing much dirtier things than ever before. At first, Sarah was too accommodating to my ideas, and once I realized that it was mainly due to guilt, I had to talk to her about it for a long time and finally went to couples counseling to resolve the issue. Sarah felt more at ease after this, resisting some of my more outlandish ideas, and I was glad for that. It showed me that she was becoming more of herself. At the end of that year, I asked Sarah to move in with me and the kids, and she almost broke down right in front of my eyes. We became a family again, and in some ways became stronger because of it. We all continued to see a counselor for several months after this major event in our lives. We've all had little problems that we've had to deal with as we embark on a new beginning. As with any family, there have been and will be issues that need to be addressed, as with any family, but we are all determined to improve things as we move forward. Will we get married again? Well, I restyled her last engagement ring, so I guess fingers crossed.